Hey everybody, so as promised, I was going to briefly go over the slides from the last few days reading. I'm going to do a second video on the Jefferson Administration, and just to let you know, I'm going to make these pretty quick because we've done the reading on this, and these notes really speak for themselves, I think, and I don't want to ramble on. I tend to do that, so I just really want to focus on causes, a couple of comparisons, a little bit of continuity and change, and then I really want to target this video towards how we can use these notes to address the essay. And again, remember that you don't have to be a master of all this content. So if I'm talking about a slide that you don't feel is appropriate to what you want to write on, then just skip over it. Don't waste your time. Okay? So without further ado, here we go. We left off with the Whiskey Rebellion. You've probably had enough time at this point to write some of this down. If not, just pause it really briefly. So I like to compare the causes of the Whiskey Rebellion to Bacon's Rebellion, right? Remember that in the mid 17th century, right? So before the American Revolution. And the immediate cause was a tax on the production of whiskey and the sale of whiskey, right? And then the ultimate takeaway, right? You really want to compare this to Shays' Rebellion and think about the fact that this time the federal government was easily able to stop this rebellion, whereas in Shays' Rebellion, the government had a very difficult time raising a militia because they had no constitutional authority to do so. Right, moving on. We have talked about Washington's farewell address, and we've really talked about President a lot. So, again, remember the huge takeaways. At this point, he definitely realized that factionalism was well on its way, right? At this point, we have really tense relationships between both Britain and France and the United States. And so Washington first warns against foreign entanglements. In other words, he really didn't want the United States to ally with anybody. And the second large takeaway is that he warned against political parties, right? And he called them factions, right? We also refer to them as factions. All right, moving on. Okay, so the Adams administration. At this point, again, we were just talking about political parties. But now we have an official name. During the Adams administration, we have the official formation of the Democratic Republican Party, which we also refer to as the Jeffersonians, right? And we talked about most of this in class, so just take a moment to take this away and feel free to ask me any questions. So Adams was elected by a very, very narrow victory, right? And we see clear sectionalism in the map, and we already talked about what sectionalism is in class. All right, and also we watched that video as an entrance ticket, which is on these slides. I can write down in the video description which slide it is. So pause this, take a look. I don't believe that that video mentions the quasi-war with France in name. So basically what this means here in the notes is that even though Adams was able to successfully avoid war with France by essentially standing up to the French diplomats and, again, refusing to give them a bribe, uh, there was still a lot of unofficial fighting, especially in the Caribbean, between the United States and France. It was largely French ships attacking American ships. Okay, we also have a pretty good sense of the Alien and Sedition Acts from that video. So again, in case any of these slides are unclear to you, you really don't need to go into this much detail, I don't think, in your essay. But what you see, really, the ultimate takeaways of these, again, this is seen as really clearly partisan legislation. Adams actually reluctantly signed these into law, so this was actually more engineered by the Federalist Party than by John Adams, but he ultimately gets blamed for it. So that's one of the reasons why historians have really re-examined him in recent years, like we talked about in class. So basically, what we see is this is actually more than one law, right? The Alien and Sedition Acts. So the different laws, really quickly, as you can see here, you have the Naturalization Act, and what that does is it actually makes it so that you need to be a resident of the United States for 14 years before you can apply for citizenship or naturalization. It was 5 years prior to that. So you see a huge jump there, of course. And the Alien Act makes it so that if you are suspected of being an illegal alien, right, or an undocumented immigrant, as we say these days, um, basically this means that you could be imprisoned or deported, right? And then you also have the Sedition Act, which applied to anyone, citizens or not citizens, and it meant that if you wrote anything that was considered libel or slander, essentially writing or speaking against the government, that was a crime and you could be imprisoned. And again, we talked about how it was partisan legislation. Down here, Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Ultimately, the takeaway for this is it establishes yet another precedent, nullification, which is declaring a law null and void. This is not an official decision, right? But it was called the Virginia and Kentucky resolution, of course, because the representatives from Virginia and Kentucky at the time came up with this idea. We will see nullification will be a major topic in the future, so I would consider that a key term. All right, so we definitely talked about this in class, so I would just say pause the video, right, and feel free to ask me any questions. I forget if we talked about the 12th Amendment, so essentially what that was mainly as a result of this increasing partisan nature of politics. It was really contentious after the 1796 election for Jefferson to be Adams's vice president. They were really very polarized in terms of their political opinions. So what the 12th Amendment did was it made it so that you voted separately for vice president, and that is yet another precedent that we see again. I keep emphasizing this word precedent. Bear that in mind. And last but not least, I will record another video next, so we're going to stop here. But the Hamilton-Burr duel. A lot of you probably know quite a bit about this. We talked about it a little bit. So Weehawken, New Jersey. It's right across the Hudson River from Manhattan. And at this point, oh, my apologies, the date is wrong up here. It should be 1804. It says 1800. But in any case, at this point, we already really established, I think, in class the dichotomy between Burr and Hamilton, both personal and political. And of course, we also know at this point that Hamilton ultimately sways the 1800 presidential election in favor of Jefferson, and Hamilton dies as a result of this duel. And one of the ultimate takeaways of this duel is that the Federalist Party, which already had declined significantly because of John Adams's weaknesses, the Federalist Party has significantly declined at this point, but it won't completely die until 1814, and we'll get there soon. All right, so let's stop this one here. All right, thanks for listening.